Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are back to play a game again. We are going to play Bootleg or Not, because we have done this once before. You guys seem to enjoy it, and I felt like, why not make this a reoccurring thing just to add a little bit of fun to the channel. We'll go ahead and decipher whenever I make a bad decision and buy one of these random AliExpress figures. If it seems like it could be a bootleg, we'll try to decipher together if it is in fact a bootleg. This time we've got a Mosasaurus, and this Mosasaurus looks strikingly like this Mosasaurus, and obviously this would be the Papo version. Now, straight out of the gate, I actually have not taken a look at these together at all. When I saw this one on AliExpress, someone actually had pointed it out to me and recommended that I grab it and, of course, film a review. But when I was looking at the figure, I'm thinking, boy, it really, really looks like the Papo version of the Mosasaurus. However, I mean, there were some very obvious similarities between the two figures, but the head sculpts look different to me a little bit, so I wasn't entirely sure if it was one of those figures that it was obviously like bootlegged, or if it was one of those figures that was just inspired by. Having it here and actually looking at the two together for the first time, it really looks like it's just a straight up bootleg, but it's not exactly a bootleg. It is, I mean, it very clearly looks like it is, but there's definitely some differences between the two figures, which, you know, right here it doesn't look like there is, but we're going to go ahead and jump to a closer look here in just a second, and we'll, you know, decipher all of the differences and similarities. But one thing that is interesting about this figure is you actually get a little Dinosaur with it, which I guess would be the dinner for our Mosasaurus. So, I mean, at least they try to give you something a little fun, I guess, with it. I don't know what that is, why there's like a weird peg on the back of the pterosaur here. That's very strange. I'll have to look inside the mouth. Maybe there's like a peg hole in there. I don't know. Regardless, we're going to go ahead right now. We're not going to focus on this pterosaur. Go away, goodbye. And we're going to look at these two figures and then come to the conclusion of whether or not this is a bootleg or not. So straight away, when you look at this Mosasaurus, it does have a pretty cool look to it. It definitely has a nice looking color scheme, which I actually think looks very cool because it has variations of like purples and blues and like darker and lighter blues. And then it also has this random orange spotting going through the body. I'm not a huge fan of the spotting that it has, but I really do quite like the very interesting mixture of blues and purplish tones and stuff that we have going on with it. There's also a very dark wash, it looks like. Not so much on the underside. Looks like they didn't apply it at all down here. But up here you can see very dark tones. Maybe it's not even a wash. Maybe they started with a dark tone, then dry brushed all of this other color over it. I'm not too sure. The figure does also have an articulated jaw. You can see they've given it a nice gloss coat on the inside of the mouth, as well as a reddish wash to add a little extra to it. And yes, there is actually a peg hole on the inside of the mouth to add the pterosaur. So that's kind of cool, actually. Definitely helps to create a little bit of a diorama for you when it comes to this figure. But of course, we're not here just to sell ourselves on this. We're here to establish if it's even worth picking up in the first place, because I don't know if it is in fact a bootleg. Now, one thing that really kind of confused me right out of the gate, and one thing that really kind of made me wonder if it was in fact a bootleg, is the positioning of the head and neck. You can see the Mosasaurus from Papo, if we actually hold them up here, has a very different position to the head and neck. This one, the newer version here, the potential bootleg, or most likely a bootleg, is a lot more straightforward with a slight right tilt to it. You can see the Papo version has a strong left turn to the head and neck. So that was one of the things that threw me off right out of the gate, you know, because I often get these figures and they look very similar to other companies' figures that are out, but then I realized later on that they're just kind of inspired by them. So I didn't know out of the gate again what was going on here, because they do look very different when it comes to the positioning of the head, and you can see the same thing for the underside. But you will also notice when looking at the underside that the actual detailing does look very similar. Even the texturing of the skin looks pretty similar on both figures, but again a little bit different from each other. But it's really tough because, like, you see this spot right here, and that's not quite how it looks over here. So maybe if it is bootlegged, they have resculpted some aspects of the figure. Same deal down here. The do not look similar at all, if you ask me. This little area of the skin actually runs down between the chest, whereas with the Papo version, it stops short of the chest. So a little bit of difference as far as that goes. But if we look over here on the side, you can see that the flippers of the Mosasaurus definitely look very similar. Though if this is bootlegged, which I think it is, they've definitely retextured the figure a lot, because when you look at the Papo version, there is a really fine sort of skin texture to it, really nice and crisp, but really fine. Whereas on this version, the skin texture is a lot more generic. It looks like they've put the figure into some sort of a program, obviously scanned it potentially, and then retextured it with a very generic type of skin texture. But you will see actually that I'm picking up on right now very strong similarities to the skin wrinkles right there in the joint of where the flipper is. They look actually very similar. So sometimes when they bootleg, there's just some aspects you can't hide. You can very clearly see that the flippers look similar, but definitely a lot more crisp and a lot nicer looking on the Papo version. The dorsal fin as well, obviously straight out of the gate, the fact that we have a dorsal fin is something that you don't always see on Mosasaurus, so that kind of gives it a strong similarity. But you will see that the dorsal fin on the Papo version back there has like some slight kind of chips taken out of it, like a little bit of damage, making it look like there's a little more life to it, whereas this version is kind of cut and dry, very generic looking. There's not much to it. So if, again, it is a bootleg, they've definitely resculpted a little bit of the figure as far as that goes. The rear flippers as well, they're kind of in the same spot. They look like they're in the same spot overall as far as the way they're kind of leaving the body and laying out there. Maybe actually a little bit more of a downward position for the newer version, more so than the Papo version, but they still look extremely similar as far as the overall shape and even the skin detail. Actually, I just noticed there's one area where you can really see. I think at this point it's very safe to say that this is a bootleg, which I assumed it probably was once I actually got it in hand. But the skin wrinkles leading out here through the tail, look at that on the Papo version. They look pretty much identical, just obviously it's been retextured a lot. And then as we lead out into the tails, this is the area where I think it's most obvious that this is most definitely a bootleg. The overall design, the curvatures, everything looks very similar on the tail. There's one area specifically that looks super similar, and right here, the way that the skin curves on that top part of the fin, you can see occurring on this one. The end of the fin looks a little different, and definitely a little different over here, a little more rounded on the edge, and the texturing kind of looks similar but a little bit different. But they are in such a very obviously similar pose. So I mean, this one seems a little more cut and dry than the Spinosaurus that I had reviewed. This one just looks a little bit too similar to each other to argue the fact that this figure is definitely bootlegged from the Papo version. You can see the undersides look a little different, but for the most part, pretty darn similar. There's just more life to the underside of the Papo version. You can see like the structure of the body a lot better, whereas it's a little more generic over here. I don't know if they've sculpted anything differently over here on this one, or if it's just from the process of bootlegging, maybe they lost some of the detail. I'm not entirely sure. Even the underside actually looks a little different as far as the texturing. You can see that it looks, again, very reptilian over here, more generic over here. There's one area, again, that kind of threw me off when I was looking at them was the head sculpt, because you can see the head sculpt looks very similar on the upper side, but the Papo version has like this nice look to around the eye. This kind of has it, but there's like something here that actually follows along here, and it's a little bit more pronounced and, you know, more obvious than what you see on the Papo version. And I think even the eye socket in general is a bit different. You can see the eye socket of the Papo version definitely looks a lot different than what we see on this version. The eye is also smaller, and the lower jaw looks a lot different than what we see on the Papo version. But even the skin and the neck looks different, but again, it's repositioned entirely. So I think maybe they've used the body for the Papo version, but then taken like a different head, or at the very least resculpted the head of this new version to look different. The inside of the mouth looks very similar again, but a little bit different actually, I would say. The tongue definitely has a different shape on the inside of the mouth of the newer one compared to the Papo version. And the inside of the mouth on the upper side definitely looks very similar, but again, a little different. You can actually see the teeth almost look a little better on the bootleg version compared to the Papo version. They're a little more jumbled on the Papo version, spread apart a little bit further on the other version. So, in my opinion, my findings here, I guess you could say, lead me to believe that this is definitely a bootlegged figure. And I think it's just been altered significantly in certain areas. Like, they've retextured it completely. They've given it a different head, different inside of the mouth, slightly changed the positioning of the flippers on some of them, also changed the way some of the fins look, like the dorsal fin and stuff. But the one area that they forgot to change, and I feel like they really could have made this look like a fairly convincing, almost original figure if they had done that, was the tail and the positioning of the tail. I think that is the area that gives this figure away the most significantly, is the tail looking so darn similar to the Papo version. If they had repositioned the tail, I feel like they could have potentially gotten away with this looking like an original figure, because they have altered so much to it, which just goes to also show you that you really never can tell when it comes to these companies if they've taken a figure and then just altered it to a point where it looks like it could be an original figure, but it really isn't. You know, they've obviously scanned the Papo Mosasaurus and then readjusted a whole bunch of different areas on the figure, even to the point of completely retexturing it. I don't personally understand, if you're going to bootleg a figure, why go through all of that? It's not like they're going to, get in trouble for it, because at this point there's so many bootlegs on the market in China. They really should get in trouble for it. They absolutely should be sued for it. It's definitely a bootleg in my opinion. You guys will have to let me know what you think about this and whether you think it is in fact a bootleg or not. I'm going to go ahead and slide this pterosaur into that peg hole because I just really want to see this. If I can get it in there. There we go. We just have to shove it up in there. So that is pretty neat. I do actually quite like that. And of course you can close the mouth so it looks like he just caught himself a pterosaur. And just in case you wanted to get a closer look at the pterosaur, it's actually not half bad. It's not great. You can see it's covered in pycnofibers and it has a decent amount of paintwork to it. Some very smooth transitions. And I think the detail actually on the pterosaur looks a little better than it does on the Mosasaurus. You've got a little area of blue up there in the face of the pterosaur. So the pterosaur isn't really great, but it is a neat little addition to this set, I will say that. So, like I said, unfortunately, I would definitely say this one is a definitive bootleg, but I'm absolutely interested to hear your take on it and what you guys think. So in the comment section, please let me know your thoughts, if you think it is definitely a bootleg or not, and I will see you guys in the next review. Thanks for watching.